Welcome, everyone. I'm Christy MacLear, founder of Artist Ventures and the co-chair of the MAS Board of Directors. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for Person, Place, and Thing with Danny Meyer. A little bit of housekeeping. Before we get started, I want to direct your attention to the chat where the MAS staff has placed some helpful hints and details. I'd also like to highlight the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and there you can ask any questions you want, which our speakers will respond to after their dialogue. So about our program, MAS is pleased to present this fourth installment of Person, Place, and Thing. The radio show is a program based on the idea that people are particularly engaging when they speak not directly about themselves, but about one person, a place, or a thing that's particularly inspiring to them. The result are some surprising stories from great leaders, and you can check these out, the past episodes, on MAS's YouTube channel. I'm delighted to introduce today's speakers, starting with the Person, Place, and Things host, Randy Cohen. Randy's written humor pieces, essays, and stories for publications including The New Yorker, Harper's, The Atlantic, Young Love Comics, and the New York Times Magazine. He's received 5 Emmys, congratulations, including 3 for his work writing on Late Night for David Letterman. His most recent book, Be Good: How to Navigate the Ethics of Everything, was published by Chronicle. Now I'm happy to introduce today's guest, Danny Meyer. Danny is the CEO of Union Square Hospitality Group, which holds some of New York's most beloved and acclaimed restaurants, including Gramercy Tavern, My Favorite, The Modern, Maialino, and more. Danny and USHG founded Shake Shack, the modern-day roadside burger restaurant, which became a public company in 2015. USHG also offers large-scale event services, food service solutions for public and private institutions, industry consulting, and educational programming. I'm really proud to say that in 2018, MAS awarded Danny and his wife Audrey with the Jackie Kennedy Onassis Award, honoring their impact in New York City's culture and community. Thank you so much for joining the conversation. Randy and Danny, please enjoy. Take it away.
So Danny, who's your person?
Great to be with you. My person is Mary Smith. Mary was an enormous part of my life growing up in St. Louis. And I actually co-dedicated my book, Setting the Table, to Mary, along with my family, because Mary was my family. She was our housekeeper. She had a family her parents were sharecroppers in Mississippi. And she lived close to the age of 90 years old and was somebody who showed me love, showed me wisdom, showed me guidance, and remains to this day, with her lack of formal education, probably the wisest person I think I've ever met.
Well, how do you mean that? Wisdom in this context?
She knew the truth, spoke the truth, had an amazing moral compass, told me when I was full of it, loved me when I needed it, hugged me when I needed it, fed me when I needed it, reprimanded me when I needed it, and in a way that sometimes parents themselves can't, because she was one step removed. And we cooked together. She made me amazing birthday cakes, banana cake with the best frosting you've ever had, with edible letters on top. I don't know. I just like this. This was a person who I wanted to be more like, and I still want to be more like her.
Oh, did her family come from Mississippi to St. Louis? Was this part of the Great Migration?
Yes. And yet, I believe that by the time she got here, she only had a sister and she might have had a brother with her as well, but not her parents. Her parents probably had predeceased their move to St. Louis. And this was, St. Louis, and this is coming out more and more today, but St. Louis is an incredibly segregated community. There's north of Del Mar and south of Del Mar, and there's east of Kings Highway and west of Kings Highway. And what's really interesting is that she and so many people who came to St. Louis at the exact same time, African Americans who migrated a little bit north to St. Louis, came with nothing and established really loving neighborhoods of their own. And I felt very welcome. I went to her home as soon as I got my driver's license at the age of 16. Hers was a home that I wanted to be at all the time. And I can still see it on Lee Avenue. And it was a 2 apartments in 1 home kind of place. And I wasn't supposed to be in that neighborhood. But guess what? She wasn't supposed to be in my neighborhood all the time.
Well, it's a really challenging thing to talk about. And when you were a kid, were you aware of issues of race, and was she able to talk to you about that?
I was aware. I was aware, St. Louis was a place that was also somewhat segregated in terms of being Jewish. It was not an easy place to grow up Jewish at the same time. But with respect to race, Mary was not somebody who spoke about it in any kind of sense that she felt disadvantaged, and yet she was. But she had a remarkable heart and a remarkable work ethic, and never complained. And I cannot even imagine how hard it was to be Mary Smith, being driven in a carpool with other housekeepers to neighborhoods that she would never live in, but was responsible for everything from being there for their kids as she was. She wasn't a babysitter. She wasn't a nanny. She was a housekeeper. And yet she did this extra thing out of love. And we loved her. All of us did.
Did she have kids of her own?
She never had kids, Randy. And, one of the real tragedies was, I'll never forget this as long as I live, that there came a day when we got this news that her husband, Charlie Smith, had allowed their nephew, they didn't have any of their own kids, but had allowed their nephew to drive his car. And the nephew drove the car into a tree, killing Mary's husband, Charlie. And Mary could not come to work for at least 2 years. I honestly don't know. It felt like a decade. Maybe it was 1 year, maybe it was 3 years, but those were really sad years in my life because I needed her, and I didn't have that kind of emotional support that she was providing me at that point. And we reached out for her, and she just couldn't talk for the longest time because she was so distraught. But she did come back. And as the years went by, she grew older and older, but we stayed in very close touch. She actually got on an airplane and flew to New York in 1985 for the opening of my first restaurant, Union Square Cafe. My own father was not even at that opening. And she also came to my wedding with Audrey in 1988. And I think those were probably the only 2 times she had ever been on an airplane. And the persuasion that it took for her to do that was quite something.
Well, you do speak about her very much like you're speaking about a parent, and you said something about distance, that she had a little more distance from you and could do things your own parents couldn't do. Is that so, or is she like a third parent in your life?
You know, in some respects, she may have been like a first parent. The story goes, and I certainly don't remember it because I was days old, but the story goes that my mom, when she came back with me from the hospital, handed me right to Mary and said, "Here's your boy."
Wow.
And she took that seriously.
Wow. Wow. Did she, was she aware of you as Jewish? I'm guessing she was not Jewish. Churchgoer? Was she a churchgoer?
Yes, she was aware, and no, she wasn't Jewish. And yes, she became, after Charlie passed away, an incredibly devout Jehovah's Witness. And she shared all those learnings with us. I think she had been religious before that, but she was not Jehovah's Witness before that. And I think it was a calling that probably added a number of years to her life because it gave her a higher purpose. And she would always try to get me to read the latest edition of Awake, which I always gave it a shot, but it didn't really do it for me. But I loved her all the more for that. And she never tried to foist converting or anything like that. But that was important to her.
Did you have any kind of religious upbringing, Danny? Did you go to any religious training? Did your family go to services?
We did. It's a very good question, an interesting question, and this is something that I think New Yorkers sometimes have a tough time relating to. But many of the German Jewish families that migrated to the Midwest, St. Louis for sure, were almost more interested in assimilating than they were in bringing their religious traditions with them. And so it's fair to say that my own German Jewish grandparents on my dad's side of the family bordered on anti-Semitic. And I know that sounds crazy, but in that generation, apparently it took turning your back on your religion to a degree in order to be welcomed into a community that otherwise may not have done that. Now, my father, the son of those grandparents, did find his own religious conversion via a trip to Israel when my mother was pregnant with me, and came back and actually co-founded a very, very Reform Jewish synagogue in St. Louis. So in some respects, it was a repudiation of what he had been brought up with from his own parents, but it truly defined the word Jewish, like not too Jewish, just Jewish. This was a place that we would go to Sunday school, not Saturday school, but Sunday school. We basically learned ethics and Jewish cooking, and there were no bar mitzvahs. I did not have a bar mitzvah. As a matter of fact, I'll never forget that the one scandal I recall, there were two scandals. One was the number of kids who were leaving Sunday school early to go see the St. Louis Cardinals play football. But the other was the one family whose son wore a prayer shawl. You weren't supposed to do that because that was being too Jewish at that point.
That's it's a Jonathan Miller joke. They said, "Are you a Jew, Mr. Miller?" He goes, "Well, Jewish."
Yeah.
It was. Yeah, it's Reformed Jews of the Midwest. But there was no, so you learned Jewish cooking not from, I was wondering if you learned it and where you learned it. So not from Mary, but you learned it in Sunday school.
I didn't know.
Somewhat.
No, from Mary, I learned a lot of things that to this day are my very favorite comfort foods. And among those things were not Jewish foods.
Uh-huh. But was that your first sense of being formally taught your way around the kitchen?
I was never really formally taught my way around the kitchen. I just always loved to eat. And Mary was very happy about that. As a matter of fact, she would, if she were cooking something at our home, and again, she was neither our babysitter nor a cook, but her cooking was really good. And so I encouraged her to cook whenever I had a voice. And oftentimes she would sneak me a taste of things before dinner. And I would take those things back to my room and enjoy them as a, antipasto, so to speak. I just couldn't get enough.
Well, as long as you brought up comfort food and food that Mary taught you, maybe we should go from person to thing, and you should tell us a little about your thing.
Well, my thing is a perfect segue because
that's why I earn the big money, Danny.
Yeah, well, you're good.
Just because of that.
My thing is the thing that Mary did best, and she made a lot of great food. I mean, I would die to have her birthday cake again, the banana cake. I would die to have her macaroni and cheese. We came kind of close with that recipe at Blue Smoke, by the way, for her macaroni and cheese. Her collard greens were second to none. On a few occasions, I tried her chitlins, and they are the best chitlins I've ever had. And I did not like them, but they were so bad, I've never had anyone else's chitlins. But I've tried on 3 different occasions. But the thing that Mary did, and to this day, it is my very favorite comfort food. And of course, the way she made it was the best I ever had, was fried chicken. And I can still see her standing at the stove with her side to the stove. And I can see the skillet with the black handle and the Crisco oil. And I can see the bag of chicken that is nothing but flour and salt and a ton of black pepper and just a tiny little shake of paprika. And I can see the love and the care with which she immersed the chicken in the oil, and then would use the fork, the tines of the fork, just to see when it was exactly ready to turn over. And then she put the top on so that it would finish cooking almost in a steam kind of way as well. And boy, she made that so well. And that's, when I would go to her apartment on Saturdays, it was for the purpose of eating with her and watching her cook. And I cannot even imagine the effort it took her to do this, to go shop for me. As a 16-year-old, I wasn't reimbursing her for shopping or for her time. I wasn't cleaning her kitchen afterwards. She didn't have a dishwasher.
You're a terrible young man.
I hope that she was getting something out of it too, because there was someone who just worshiped her and worshiped her cooking as well. And it didn't matter, 16 years old, before way before there was the internet, 16 years old and being able to drive a car equaled independence. And what it meant was you could do what you wanted to do without having to ask permission for it. But it was impossible to come home without my mom knowing exactly what I'd been doing, because every ounce of my clothing smelled like fried chicken in this very hot apartment.
Did they object to your hanging at Mary's apartment?
Not at all. Not at all.
Oh, okay.
I think the only objection my mom had was that I was, probably not a big surprise, incredibly interested in eating. And,
yeah.
I think that it's fair to say that my mom was concerned that if I just ate, and now, by the way, I was also playing tennis and playing football and street hockey. So I wasn't just like Augustus Gloop from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. But I think that if my mom had her way, she would have rather that I was not spending my time eating, but she didn't. I never, ever had any pushback about going down to see Mary. And by the way, my brother and sister had very, very similarly close relationships with Mary. The only difference is they were excited to see her anytime, anywhere, but they were not drawn to the food the way I was drawn to the food.
Well, you called fried chicken the greatest comfort food. Say a little more about that. What makes it what do you mean by comfort food, and why is fried chicken the best?
Well, I think comfort food expresses itself. You don't have to define it. It's something that you think of eating when you want comfort or you need comfort. And what's interesting is that to this day, if it's Mother's Day, I'm asking Audrey if she wants to go out for fried chicken. And she goes, that's your comfort food, not my comfort food.
What's Audrey's comfort food, by the way?
Very, very easy. Pasta with red sauce. That's what Audrey likes the most. The more sauce, the better. But comfort food for anybody. It's not my only comfort food, by the way. I comfort myself with sausage mushroom pizza any day of the week. But there's something about the love with which something was introduced to you and the pleasure that eating it gave you, combined with the love behind the presentation of it, that makes it comfortable, and that lasts forever.
So is what's comforting, in a way, not the food itself. It's all the emotional associations around the food.
No question. And
really? So it could have been anything. If Mary had cooked, I don't know, only pie, then it would be comfort pie.
That would be it.
Yeah. Do you think? I mean, I've heard people claim that because a meal is prepared with affection for the people who are receiving it, it changes the way the food tastes.
There's no question about that. And, interestingly, when we were bringing up our kids, and I loved cooking with our kids. One of them, Hallie, is now in the ice cream business with Cafe Pana, and she can cook circles around me these days. But I'll never forget, one of my favorite things to cook with the kids was Nestle's Toll House cookies. And we all can see that yellow bag, that classic yellow Nestle's bag. And what I loved about it, when the kids were very, very young, you could learn a lot about your kid, and you could teach your kid quite a bit just with that little bag. You could teach them to follow instructions. You could teach them a little bit about math. You could teach them about safety. You got to preheat the oven, and you have consequences if you don't respect what the heat is. You teach them the pleasure of creating pleasure for themselves, right? Because who doesn't want to eat a hot cookie they just made? But the biggest thing I think I learned about my kids was the pleasure that they got, not just in what they were doing for themselves, but the pleasure of presenting that plate of cookies to us. And so to this day, when I see someone whose greatest pleasure is in the provision of pleasure, that's the kind of person that I definitely want to hire, that kind of person in our restaurants, because it's not just that the cookies are good, it's that when your pleasure is providing me with pleasure, those cookies somehow taste even better.
So is there a paradox, though, that when people are cooking for people they love, that's usually at home, you have to know the people, but in a restaurant, you can't know who's going to eat the food. So is it harder to do that?
Well, it's all connected in a restaurant, because the server who's bringing you the food is also part of this thread, and it has to provide them pleasure. They were the person who took your order. They were the person who answered your questions on the menu when you couldn't decide between the chicken and the salmon. And if they made one suggestion or the other, they should want to see that you're very happy with the suggestion they made. And so it's not just the cook, but meanwhile, in a really healthy restaurant environment, there's a feedback loop also between the server and the cook. And you want the server to be able to go back to the cook and say, you know, those people just loved the lobster pot pie or whatever it was they're eating. And it should make it, you know, when you hire people who have what we call a high HQ, and Mary had the highest of HQs.
Wait, what's HQ?
HQ is hospitality quotient, and that's somebody very much like an IQ, which is you're just born with it, whatever it is. You don't, and an IQ, I could go read the encyclopedia tonight, and my IQ is not going to get any higher or lower.
Right.
And
if it means
also,
that, if that's
it's
true,
also not a value statement on me, whatever my IQ. It's, I'm not worse than you because my IQ is lower than yours. But similarly with an HQ, it's not something that changes too much over time, but it's a way to describe the degree to which somebody is actually happier themselves when they're providing pleasure for someone else. And we've noticed that there's 6 emotional skills that are always present at a high level in someone who's got a high HQ. And that's what we look for. But we look for that whether they're a cook or a sommelier, or whether they're a maitre d', or whether they're a waiter, bartender. That's what we look for the most. And Mary was off the charts with her HQ because nothing made her happier than when she presented that platter of fried chicken and that amazingly creamy bowl of macaroni and cheese.
I know you speak a lot about hospitality as a kind of philosophical ideal. And is it the way in which emotion is transmitted from the preparation of the food to the eating of the food? Is that what we mean? By, is that what you mean by hospitality?
May not have to do, food may not even be part of it. Hospitality exists when the person on the receiving end of whatever it is you did or provided, it even could be in a conversation, but hospitality exists when the other person truly knows you're on their side.
These,
that's simple. I wish I could make it more complicated than that. Hospitality exists when you feel like someone did something for you, not something to you.
There's scenes of eating all through Boswell's diaries. It's how people ate when they were having dinner with friends in the 18th century. And it often involved one person at the table looking at the person next to them and saying, "Oh, sir, can I cut you a piece of this beef?" And it was the deliberate intent to please the other people you were with. And it seemed very much a part of what it is to socialize in the 18th century, especially to eat. And that seems less true now. No one's ever sliced a piece of turkey for me and said, "Oh, Randy, can I give you this delicious piece, sir, to please you?"
But I think you're probably right. And I would also say, though, that hospitality has to be a dialogue. I've seen people who think that just doing something over and over and over again, like slicing turkey, is hospitality. But what if you didn't want turkey? So in hospitality, one size fits one. It's a custom experience. It's not off the rack. It's not, I'm going to do it the same way. That's a monologue. And here's a story that I want to share. I was with a good friend of mine a handful of years ago. And I took him to one of the best restaurants in all of New York for his 50th birthday. And unfortunately, we had not called ahead. It was my name with the reservation for 2. And they had saved the most romantic side-by-side seating in the entire restaurant. And so I'm taking my friend, who's probably 225 pounds, a really big guy, probably more than 225. Back then anyway. And it's like, we're like thigh to thigh. And he's like, "Hey, thanks, Danny. Really grateful to you for taking me here." And the next thing is that the maitre d' comes up and says, and doesn't even look at my friend, just looks straight at me and says, and he's got a tray with 2 glasses of champagne. 2 glasses of champagne for you, without looking at my friend. And my friend's like, I didn't want champagne. Why couldn't they just be like a good old Irish pub where they say, what'll it be? As opposed to imposing what you think I want. My friend wanted a martini for his birthday. Great. So the point is, it was a really, really generous thing. 2 glasses of champagne. I gather the price was, probably close to $50 for the 2 of those. So on one hand, you might say, isn't that hospitality? But I would say, did that happen for him? No, it didn't. No one looked
to
him in
him.
the eye. Yeah. So hospitality, you've really got to have someone who's got the emotional skills to ask, we call it reading signs, which is, what's the sign hanging? Everyone in life is walking around with an invisible sign hanging around their neck. And the sign, we learned this from Mary Kay Cosmetics a million years ago, but the invisible sign, the headline is "Make me feel important." And then the really, really effective people can read the invisible subtitle, which always starts with the word "by." And it could be "Make me feel important by leaving me alone." It could be "Make me feel important by recognizing that it's my birthday," or "Make me feel important by letting me tell you everything I know about wine." But that wasn't happening. And so in hospitality, it is a dialogue, and you've got to be able to read the sign, and you got to be able to read that everybody's being on their side is a different kind of thing.
Oh, see, I thought you were going somewhere else with that, and that with Mary Kay Cosmetics, the invisible sign was by BUY.
Oh yeah, that's
But
right.
I live in a very dark world. I should remind people that when we finish our 3rd segment, we'll happily take questions, and you should just put them in the Q&A box. Danny, can we turn to your place? What's your place?
Well, my place is also in St. Louis. It's interesting that when you ask me these 3 questions, person, place, and thing, I decided to try not to override my gut responses to each one of them. And each one of them took me to where I grew up in St. Louis. And so my place is called Carbon Monoxide Gardens. And I bet none of you has ever been there before.
Not me.
So,
and no one would want to go there ever since, having heard the name of it.
Well, it was lovingly called Carbon Monoxide Gardens, lovingly by my grandmother, Grandma Louise. And, not too dissimilarly from Mary, Grandma Louise had the, completely non-judgmental, one person removed from my parents' ability to see me and to provide that same kind of love. And also, like Mary, they love to see me eat. So it's not a big surprise to me that 2 of the people that feature in our story today are people that permitted me to do what I wanted to do all the time, with some really, really good food also at my grandparents' house. And Carbon Monoxide Gardens, my grandmother, Grandma Louise, was an only child born in Carthage, Missouri. And she was blessed with an exceptional green thumb. She could look at a plant and it would grow. I don't know why or how that came about, but that was the case. And somehow her apartment building, which was, I believe, a skyscraper by St. Louis terms, so 7 stories tall, on Lindell Boulevard, across from the famous Chase Park Plaza Hotel, had a large parking lot in the back of the building. And that's where you parked if you were going to go visit anyone who lived in the 4950 Lindell Boulevard, which ironically is exactly a half block from our first ever Shake Shack in St. Louis. So it's kind of amazing how all these worlds collide. But the apartment building granted her a plot of dirt adjacent to the parking lot that the building owned. And she lovingly called it Carbon Monoxide Gardens, because there it was with cars pulling up to it all day long. And it was the most beautiful flower garden. She didn't grow vegetables, but it was the most incredible flower garden. And by the time I was, I'm going to guess 6 years old, my Saturday afternoon visit to my grandparents' house would usually consist of my grandmother giving me some work gloves, and she taught me how to weed her garden. And this would start probably in April or something like that. And there would be a lot of planting, and this would go on probably through June. It got pretty hot thereafter. And so I didn't want to put on the gloves after that. So that was probably 6 years old, 7 years old, 8 years old. And it kind of reminded me of a scene from Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn, where somebody was duped into painting the fence as if it were fun. Well, I was encouraged to weed the garden because it was really fun. And I got so proud of being able to identify every weed and pick them. And that was a good thing. Now, by the time I got to be, let's say 10, and this was now, my grandmother never had to teach me anything at this point because I knew how to weed her garden. I'd go down there the end of March if it was a warm spring, the beginning of April if it wasn't, and put on the gloves, and I went for the weeds. And by the time I was 10 years old, Grandma Louise taught me a new trick in carbon monoxide gardens. And as I went for the weeds, she gently lifted my hand and she said, "This year, I'm going to teach you how to make your garden sing." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "This year, you're going to learn how to feed the flowers instead of pulling the weeds." And she said, because the weeds never grow that tall. If you feed the flowers will actually create so much shade from the sun
Okay.
that the weeds will naturally go away and the flowers will blossom all the more beautifully. Well, what is amazing about that lesson that I got in the garden is that it turns out to be one of the best business lessons as well, which is that when something is not going well in business, or perhaps something's not going well with someone who works in the business, my tendency, especially as a young restaurateur, a young business person, was always to focus my attention on the problem, the person that wasn't working out that well, the business or the menu item that wasn't working out that well, which is fine. You should do that. Those are the weeds. But what this lesson has taught me is that too often we don't water the flowers. We don't feed the flowers, the stars. We sometimes take people who are thriving for granted. And what I've learned is that when you do feed the flowers, even in a team, a business, those people actually provide so much shade that the weeds tend to die off. And I'm just so grateful for that lesson that I got from Carbon Monoxide Gardens and from my grandmother.
Oh, that's great. That's great. See, I thought you were going to go a different way. And when something was, you had a horrible competitor. I think of the weeds as the competitors of the flowers, that you no longer go over and burn down their restaurant. Instead, you make your own restaurant just the glorious place that it is, and it all works out fine.
Burning down was never part of my arsenal, but
you know, I got to check my notes. I believe that's what I have too. Yeah, you arson doesn't figure much in your story. I know. Why do you think it is, by the way, Danny, that people don't grow vegetables much the way they grow flowers? Or am I just wrong about gardening?
Well, I grow vegetables. My family grows vegetables.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that's true of people. I just think that was true of my grandmother.
Oh, okay.
In carbon monoxide gardens. And I kind of understand that, because I can imagine that if everybody's pulling their car up and they see, you know, a beautiful cherry tomato bush, why not just help yourself to it? But
well, that was
dragons and petunias were not getting picked.
Well, that I was going to ask you about that too. That I think this is something that speaks well of us. That people, when they walk by someone's garden, which you do all the time, people tend not to steal the flowers. And I think that's one of the last vestiges of civilization, that we live in a community and it's good to have flowers in the neighborhood. And I like that people don't steal them. I don't know. I set the
That's a
bar.
nice thing. I'm no disagreement. That is a nice
I
thing.
set the bar very low. And
I
like
was
it.
I was actually thinking about how in New York City, you're right. People don't steal the flowers. The problem is the dogs have their way with those flowers.
Well, dog owners, I don't, you don't want to pick a fight with them. On the other hand, and you can't blame the dog, because the dog lacks an opposable thumb and can't pick up after itself. So it's like when you see people whose kids misbehave, you can, give the fish eye to the parents, but you can't, the kids are kids. You know what, gardening in America also seems a bit individual, a bit solitary. Maybe you get your family to come out with you, your grandmother got you to come out with you, but there's this, I know in England you can get an allotment, and it's more of a shared activity, a communal activity. And that always looked very appealing to me. I'm surprised we don't have more of that.
Well, you do see community gardens up and down Manhattan, and in Brooklyn, I've seen many as well.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that in other boroughs you see them. And I think there is something quite wonderful about people sharing gardening. It's
Yeah.
making food and providing something. And I think when you do that in a shared way, it adds richness to it.
Oh, the better. Yeah, the more sociability, the better. Well, you're right. Actually, I'm just wrong about this. I think that I know near where I live, right in Riverside Park at 90th Street, up on the plaza there, up on the promenade there. There's a shared garden space. Oh, Danny, you said something about your grandmother and Mary, that they let me do what I want to do, which was eat. And that seems very much like what you were saying about hospitality, that it's about what the recipient of your generosity wants, not just what you want to do, what they want.
Yeah, and they were both on my side. Yeah, I don't think I got unhealthy because I love food. But listen, my mother remains one of my, if not my most favorite person on earth. She's now 87 years old in St. Louis. And, we laugh about this all the time because she knows how much I love you. When I go home to St. Louis, and the food has gotten really good, and the restaurant scene in St. Louis has gotten really good, but she can't keep up with me because to this day, I want to try like 4 restaurants every single day. And there's a place on the hill, the Italian section. There could be a barbecue place I want to go to. There's other kind of really wonderful foods. There's Vietnamese food. There's food from Serbia. Great American restaurants. And she just didn't want it. She did not like taking me to the Husky section to shop for clothing when I was a kid. So she figured the best thing to do was to not eat quite as much. But my grandmother and Mary said, go on, eat it, enjoy it.
Oh, well, this sounds like encourage the flowers. You don't have to kill the weeds. That it isn't. So you were a big kid, and
I really wasn't that big. But I wasn't. I don't even know what husky meant, but it was never obese.
Uh-huh.
But if anything, all my mom did was make me want to eat even more. And listen, one of my very favorite classes that I took in high school was home ec, and partially because I was the only boy in the whole class, so that was kind of a cool thing to get to take a class with nothing but girls. But we learned to make homemade pizza, homemade tacos, all homemade pies. And so if I could get a grade in school for eating, I mean, how good is that?
Well, and I think you were incredibly lucky, and maybe you're just that much younger than me, that we couldn't do that in our school. Shop was for boys and home ec was for girls, to everybody's loss.
I got to do shop too. So
yeah, and everyone should get to do both. I envy you. Oh, you said, but I do think this all it all ties together. Our time is almost up. That saying yes seems to fit what you mean by hospitality. Not discouraging, but encouraging seems to fit your idea of hospitality. It's the thing that people you love did for you.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, I think we've had a breakthrough here today. Can I ask you something less intimate, which is stupid on my part, I guess, but you mentioned that the Blue Smoke mac and cheese is akin to Mary's. Do restaurant menus ever give a credit to someone that was at least the inspiration for a recipe? It's a kind of oral tradition, and so many people make things in so many ways. But
absolutely.
How do you handle that?
Absolutely. Right now on the Blue Smoke menu is probably the best fried chicken we've ever done at Blue Smoke. And I'm telling you, any chef who's ever worked at Blue Smoke knows that I really care about fried chicken. And this one is called Irma's fried chicken because Irma is the grandmother of our chef, Brett Lunsford. And he's dedicating this recipe to his grandmother. He's from the South. And I urge you to try it. It's really good fried chicken, but it also reminds me of a story. My other grandmother from Chicago, whose name was Rosetta, Grandma Rosie, had the absolute best recipe I had ever had for a potato salad. And as was the case, especially in that generation, if you had friends over for lunch and the friends raved about your potato salad, you wouldn't give them the recipe because people held on to this stuff as if it was, if it were gold or something. And so when we were opening Blue Smoke back in 2002, I was speaking to our chef at the time, and I said, we've got to get my grandmother's recipe for potato salad. It's absolutely the best I've ever had. And my grandmother Grandma Rosie had passed away probably 5 years before that. I actually had all four of my grandparents till I was 35, which is kind of a remarkable thing. And I got her recipe book. So I had the recipe for her famous potato salad. And I said, if we have this at Blue Smoke with our ribs and our fried chicken and all the other stuff, this is gonna be amazing. So gave the recipe to the chef and he made a batch and it was perfect. And then we went to the round 2 tasting, and in a restaurant, what the chef has to do is to make sure that all the sous chefs and cooks can actually cook it as well as when the chef cooked it themselves. And so they invited me, and we were doing all of our recipe testing. Back then we used to own 11 Madison Park, and we would use the private dining room at 11 Madison Park to test recipes. And so I get into the kitchen and there's 4 cooks standing around this big silver bowl full of perfect looking potato salad. And they all looked like the cat that ate the mouse. And I'm going like, because they're going like, Danny, tell us if we did this the right way. And I'm going like, okay, but what are you guys laughing? What's going on here? Anyway. And they go, your grandmother's famous secret recipe? And with that, one of them reaches under the table, pulls out a jar of Hellmann's mayonnaise, turns it around, and on the back of the Hellmann's mayonnaise jar is the exact same recipe. And to this day, I will never know if my grandmother's secret recipe was from, and I think they called it best food back then, or whether somehow her recipe got out to them. But anybody who wants it, just go to Hellmann's mayonnaise. You can get that recipe.
Well, I'm a little shocked, but Danny, thank you so much for sharing these memories with us. We'll take some questions from the audience. Yeah. Well, this is really particular. In St. Louis, do you know Rabbi Iserman? I don't know his first name. They ran a camp,
Yeah.
Camp Chicagami.
I think I've heard the name, but I don't know him. I'm sorry.
I know. Why did I go to that question? I'm so sorry now. Where's the most popular Shake Shack?
You mean if by most popular we mean the most special is always the first, and that's Madison Square Park, because it's the one and only Shake Shack we ever had for the first 5 years. And I'm really proud that Shake Shack continues to contribute a pretty sizable portion of its revenues to Madison Square Park. If you're talking about where is the busiest one, in a non-COVID time, that would be the theater district here in New York City, and or Las Vegas on the Strip.
Someone asked about you mentioned the 6 characteristics of HQ. Can you say what they are?
Yeah, 6 emotional skills that are always present at a very high level in someone who's got a high HQ, someone who's happier themselves when they're providing happiness to someone else. And they're all going to sound quite obvious, but when you really focus on them, when you're hiring, you can make a big difference. And so the first one is kind optimism. Optimism is like hope, and hope is actually at the root of the word hospitality. Someone who actually they're kind and they believe that they can make the world better for someone else. They're hopeful. Second is curious intelligence. Someone who looks at every day as an opportunity to learn something new. They're not know-it-alls. Third is work ethic. Somebody who, in addition to teaching them how to do something, just naturally wants to do that thing as well as it can be done. And fourth is empathy, which is the ability to walk into someone else's shoes and to ask yourself, if I were that person, how would I want to be treated? And then a flip side of empathy is self-awareness, which is knowing what your own personal weather report is on any given day and understanding the impact you're having on other people, which is really, really important, especially in a team setting. And then finally is maybe the most important one of all, which is integrity, which is having the judgment to do the right thing, even when it's not in your own self-interest. So now we take those 6 emotional skills. It's not enough just to get someone who's great at making pasta. It's not enough just to get someone who's a great maitre d'. We need someone who, in addition to all the things they know how to do really well, are also high on the list of those 6 emotional skills. Then we've got a pretty successful performer on our team.
It almost sounds like the technical ability in the kitchen is quite secondary. If you find the right kind of person, they can become a great in a kitchen. But if you have someone who's just great in the kitchen and they're the wrong kind of person, they're not going to be comfortable at your place.
Yeah, it's a very, very good point. We actually, our recipe is 49 parts technical skills, 51 parts hospitality skills. Because we want to get 100. We want to get 100 on our test, but we're not going to. 59 is a fail, 51 is a fail, and a 49 is a fail. But we need them both.
Another St. Louis question. Do you ever have cravings for Ted Drew's toasted ravioli? Means nothing to me.
And it's Ted Drew's is where I go when I have a craving for frozen custard. I go to many, many places on the Hill when I have a craving for toasted ravioli. And there's quite a few really good ones in St. Louis. Toasted ravioli, it's interesting. Almost every culture has that. Chinese, you might call them fried wontons. In parts of Italy, it's called gnocco fritto. In fact, we serve those at our new restaurant, Cisiamo. But toasted ravioli is something that is done in St. Louis. It's ravioli, usually filled with some type of bolognese. And when they come out of the fryer, they're dusted with cheese and you dip them in marinara sauce. And that's a real St. Louis tradition, but not Ted Drew's does not serve them.
Oh, wow. I'm shocked. Someone asks about, mentions that the incredible range of ingredients in just available to New Yorkers, to ordinary New Yorkers. Are there any trends in that you're noticing now?
No, I don't think so. I just think that, and it's changed. I mean, New Yorkers can now access absolutely everything. It's incredible. When I started my career, we didn't know what arugula was. We didn't know what radicchio was. We barely knew what extra virgin olive oil was. That's crazy. That's not that long ago. Today, you can have anything you want shipped to you almost overnight. And I think people really appreciate quality. And if you're looking for a trend, the trend I love the most is less is more, which is it's not that extra thing you had to put on the plate. It's the unnecessary thing you took off the plate.
Man, Danny, this has been so fun. And I wouldn't describe myself as a foodie, but I describe myself as a fan of yours. Thank you so much for sharing these things.
Thank you, Randy, and what a pleasure. And I'm really grateful for this format because
it's fun, right? I love the format. You don't just do your set pieces.
Great. It's great. Thank you for taking me places that I don't usually get to return to.
And I think we're going to hand it off to Elizabeth, who has some remarks.
Yes, and thank you to both of you. I feel like everyone in the audience is going to run out and find fried chicken, great mac and cheese, and some fabulous potato salad. You've gotten us all thinking about food. Not a surprise with Danny Meyer at all. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon, and a special thanks today to MAS members who've joined us. If you're not a member and enjoyed this afternoon's program, we hope that you'll consider joining. Your membership support helps make MAS programs and advocacy towards a more livable city possible. See the chat for more information about how to support MAS. We also invite you to nominate an artwork for the 2022 Brendan Gill Prize before submissions close on February 7th. This year's prize will recognize creative works made between 2020 and 2021 that capture the spirit and energy of New York City. Please see the chat for more details. And once again, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all.